Hi, I am M. Roblin. I am about helping you seek out your potential, awaken to new possibilities, zoom up, out from those problems, get a fresh perspective. Let's keep talking about calling out behaviors that aren't additive or constructive to the kind of inclusive culture that's so important to build. If you haven't seen some of the other videos in this little mini series, I invite you to go back and see those. But I want to keep talking about this calling it out because I just want to speak for a moment about the uncomfortable kind of truth that in the last year or so many of the conversations I have with leaders, when we start talking really about diversity and what's preventing a more inclusive culture, people start talking about fear. I mean, people are really fearful of being humiliated. People are fearful of offending someone. People are fearful of being at so if we talk on one end, it's like of being ostracized and left out and excluded and, at the kind of like brunt of a joke. Yeah. But on the other end, it's like people are afraid of doing that unintentionally. Like, I don't want to offend anybody. So, and there's this conclusion almost like people end up giving in to the anxiety, and it's like, it's easier to just not engage. I'm looking at my body language. That's kind of like a turtle going into its shell. And like, that's not what inclusion is about. That's the opposite. We want to encourage people to be having conversations across difference. Difference can mean so many things: function, nationality, language, culture, race, gender, age, all of these things. We want to encourage that, but also recognize that the less proximity, the more potential for this kind of misunderstanding. So when you're in a scenario where you're observing a behavior that's coming up by somebody else that clearly isn't landing well, it's not additive or constructive, I'll give you an example in just a minute, then if that person is really blind to it, and it's a very subtle thing, to call them out publicly. Ha ha! You did this! I'm just joking. I know you won't be that aggressive, although I have heard stories like that a lot. But be careful about calling them out really publicly and in real time, because if it really truly is a blind spot and it's not their intention, it could really evoke that kind of humiliation that's going to send that turtle right back into its shell, which is really not the spirit of what we're trying to do by calling it out. We're trying to call it out so that we can build this more inclusive culture. So that can't be rooted there. But let's give it a real example. So you're in a meeting. I don't know, you're a participant in that meeting, and there's somebody mid-career, new to the company, and you've got some of the people that have been there and have developed and grown their entire career in this company. And then, the new person tries to chime in a couple times and is like not really working, but then finally this new person gets some airtime and shares some feedback. Like, here's something I'm observing that really is surprising me about this organization that I didn't expect. And, somebody else is like, essentially just like coming in and cutting that person off. Like, no, you don't know anything. Like, you're new. You have no justification to say something like that. Or, so this is an example where, this person who is like cutting off this new person's opinion, it's actually like that's a really not additive kind of behavior in an inclusive culture. We actually need to hear from the newcomers. That's important to get things that maybe we've forgotten or are blind to. So we need to listen to those kind of things. And so for that person to just label that person as the other as like, you don't know, you haven't been here long enough, that's a no-go, right? So calling that out is definitely a worthwhile exercise. But again, it goes to the question of how. Maybe in some situations, if it was serious enough and aggressive enough, but you might actually say, and if you're in a position of seniority, given the power dynamics at play, you might actually say, we don't do that here. We don't talk like that here. That was the tip I shared yesterday. But a much more nuanced one that I would invite you to consider is in real time in that scenario, maybe it's actually just saying, I'd really like to hear what that person has to say. If you feel like the conversation could continue, or it's looking at that person and saying like, the person that got cut off, like, I see you and I hear you and that was weird. And like, I just, and maybe even after the meeting, you go and check in with them. Like, I just want to let you know, I noticed that and that's not cool. That's not, I really want to hear your idea. And then it's going to that other person, one-on-one and saying, so here's what I observed. And in the meeting, I noticed, and you said that you're new, and so therefore you don't have any credibility to make that kind of a judgment on us. I noticed you said that. Like, did you notice you said that? Like, what do you think? Here's the impact it had on me. And what do you think? So it's like a three-part tool. It's like here's the observation, or you can even say like when you did this or when you said this, here's how I observed it landed in the room. Here's how it landed on me. Here's how I observed it landed in the room. Did you notice that you did that? So that's a closed question followed by what do you think? That's a really great tool. Observation from an I perspective or a very observatory behavioral perspective, followed by a closed question, then an open question. That's a great tool for giving feedback and calling people out. What do you think? Could that work? Have you been in a scenario like that? It doesn't have to be like the same dynamics of what I'm describing, but like we're talking about the nuance of calling things out in a way that's not going to push people back into their, not back into, or into their shell. How do we do it? What's working for you? Can't wait to hear. Give me a scenario, even a really tough one. PM me if you want. Private message me. I'm on all these different platforms sharing this and excited to hear how to keep this relevant and useful for you. So let me know.